Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things, and welcome to another video. And today I'm going to be telling you about my reading goals for 2024. So a new year has come around again, which means, of course, that it is time to make some new reading goals. So earlier this week, I think, possibly last week, I posted a video talking about how my reading goals for 2023 had gone. I'll link that down below. But today I'm going to be talking about my reading goals for 2024, which, to be honest, are pretty similar to my reading goals for 2023, but like with some shifts in focus. But there are a lot of things that are carrying on from 2023. But regardless, I thought it'd be fun to make one of these videos. I always enjoy looking at goals and reading goals at the start of the year. Before I get into my reading goals, I have a couple of goals which are related to books and BookTube, but are like not strictly reading goals. So one goal which I had last year, which I want to keep on into 2024, is to watch more screen adaptations of books. In general, I'm not someone who loves watching TV and film, or at least like I enjoy watching TV and film with people, but it's not something I would ever do on my own. I'm like a social watcher of things, but if I am on my own, I would always read a book or listen to an audiobook or watch BookTube. But the two things that I really do love watching on screen and that I would watch on screen on my own are Studio Ghibli films and screen adaptations of novels, especially of 19th century literature, but to be honest, of any books that I enjoy. And I feel like there are a lot of screen adaptations out there that I would enjoy that I haven't seen. So there are quite a few screen adaptations of classics I'd like to see, but also there have been some screen adaptations of novels that I love in the last few years, things like The Luminaries and The Wonder and Station 11, which I haven't seen and I would like to see. So I feel like I want to keep this goal on my list for 2024 and try and watch some more screen adaptations of books this year. Another thing I would like to try and do this year is like try and sort out how I watch BookTube. I really love BookTube and I watch a lot of BookTube, but I'm subscribed to a lot of people, like hundreds and hundreds of people. And basically I have spent the last few years like adding all of the videos of all the people I watch to my watch later playlist, which continues to be like between 300 and 400 videos long, and then I'm never watching the most recent videos people have put out, and I'm often like missing announcements, and I feel like I need to just like sort out a bit how I watch BookTube and accept that I really cannot watch all of the videos of everyone that I'm subscribed to. Basically, I tried to clear my watch later playlist at the start of 2024 and I didn't, but I got it down to 50 videos, and I'm gonna try really hard to keep my watch later playlist under control, make sure I watch the content on BookTube that I'm most excited about, and maybe also like rebalance my split between listening to audiobooks and listening to BookTube so that I'm listening to slightly more BookTube. I just feel like I need to get a hold of how and when I watch BookTube and sort that out a bit this year. And then I was trying to think about like if I have any specific goals in terms of like content making in 2024, and I don't have too many. I do think I would like to get back into doing regular book hauls because I think that makes me feel more aware of what books I am bringing onto my shelves, and I feel like I could do with some more TBR size check-ins, more on that later in this video. And I was also thinking I would kind of like to do more reading vlogs, although I do feel like I do a fair amount of reading vlogs now, but I really enjoy making reading vlogs and I really enjoy editing reading vlogs. Like they're always really fun to edit and put together, so I would kind of like to do more of them if people enjoy them. In general, if anyone has any content ideas, then now is like a good time to leave suggestions down in the comments and I will have a think. So I think that mostly covers my tangentially book related goals. I realised that I didn't put any writing goals on my list, but I do have a new novel coming out this year in July, The Trouble with Mrs Montgomery Hurst, which I'm very excited about. That's all finished and complete. I am working on another book, a third book, which I would like to finish a second draft off this year, but I am probably not gonna tell you any more than that or set any firmer goal than that. We will see how that goes. Anyway, I think that is all for my other goals. Let me get properly into my reading goals. So every year my first reading goal is just a numbers goal, a Goodreads challenge, and I always set my reading goal on Goodreads at 100 books. In general, I read well over 100 books. I think I usually read kind of between 140 and 160, although I did read 167 things in 2023, which was a lot. But I feel like 100 is always a nice round number to aim for, which doesn't kind of put me under too much pressure. Then my second goal for 2024 is, as it was in 2023, to get my physical TBR under control. But this is definitely a much bigger goal in 2024 than it was in 2023. And I definitely really need to focus on my TBR and reading books from my TBR this year. As I think I said in my 2023 goals reflection videos, I feel like there are two different ways of treating your TBR. Some people view their TBR as a library, and some people view their TBR as a to-do list. And I definitely view my TBR as a to-do list, and I find it stressful when it gets too long. So my TBR currently stands at 60 books. However, I would say that my working TBR, as it were, currently stands at 54 books, because of those 60 books, 4 of them are non-fiction books that I have got for the purposes of historical research. So I will read them when I need to read them in the process of writing the novel I'm currently writing. And also some of those books I might read half of it, but not the whole book. I'm not necessarily going to read them cover to cover in the way I would a book that I'm reading for pleasure rather than for research. So those 4 books, I will probably read bits of them at least this year, but I'm not necessarily counting them on my proper TBR. And then I also have 2 works of non-fiction that I'm just not in any hurry to read, that I kind of own, but I don't feel are on my to-do list for some reason. One of which is a biography of Barbara Pym, and I haven't read all of Barbara Pym's books yet, so I'm not going to read that yet. And one of which is a biography of Thomas Hardy, which I would like to read at some point, but I should probably read a biography of Charles Dickens before I read one of Thomas Hardy. So while I own that book and I would like to read it at some point, I just don't really consider that on my active TBR. Over the course of 2024, I would really like to get my physical TBR down to under 20 books, which I feel like I definitely should be able to do because I read a lot of books every month, but I also do tend to acquire quite a lot of books. I do get sent quite a few books to review, so even if I were to put myself on a book buying ban, I feel like I wouldn't want to refuse all proof requests, so I probably would still be getting some books on my TBR. I do also listen to a lot of audiobooks, so obviously in general that doesn't tend to be getting down my physical TBR. I have been recently trying to keep a close eye on what books I own physically are also available on audiobook from my library. So for example, I'm listening to Wayward by Amelia Hart at the moment on audiobook. I do have a physical copy of that, but I've decided to listen to an audiobook to try and help me get through my physical TBR. So I feel like I really should be able to get my physical TBR down to under 20 books this year if I am really focused on it and make that a priority. I think this year I will bring back the TBR Clear Out Readathon, which is a readathon I hosted back in 2020, which was all about reading books from your physical TBR. And back in 2020, I found it really, really helpful. I feel like at the end of 2020, my physical TBR was much lower, but that was also a year when I didn't go to any bookshops, so it's a whole different time. So I'm hoping I'm going to do the TBR Clear Out Readathon again this year, probably in April. I think I did it in April back in 2020, and hopefully that will help make a dent in my physical TBR. And I think in general, if I just focus a bit more on my physical TBR this year, I will hopefully manage to get it down to a more reasonable amount. Then I also have here my TBR jar / bucket, which as you can see is very full. So in here I have the names of all the books on my physical TBR that I owned before Christmas. So I haven't put into this jar the books that I got for Christmas, and I won't put into this jar any books I get or buy in the rest of 2024. So this bucket is basically how my TBR stood before Christmas 2023. So in this jar I have the names of 47 books from my physical TBR, and hopefully I will read a lot of them this year. I would like to end the year with less than 10 titles in this TBR jar to make sure that I am reading the books that have been on my TBR for a long time and prioritising the books I've had for a while. So I'm really hoping that 2024 will be a year of reading my own books and getting my TBR down and really focusing on this goal, because I feel like I just wasn't focusing on this goal at all in 2023. So hopefully in 2024 I will read a lot more books from my physical TBR. Then another goal I have for 2024 and one that will carry on into 2025 is to read more books from my long-term Victorian literature TBR. So I made a video back in December talking about a bunch of Victorian books that I want to read over the years 2024 and 2025. There are 35 Victorian books on that list that I want to read over the next few years. I actually read one of them at the end of December 2023 after I had made that video, and I am currently reading another 2, although one of them I'm intending to read very slowly. So I feel like I've got off to a good start with my long-term Victorian literature TBR. I will leave that video down below where I go through all of those books in much more detail. I feel like this video will be very long if I try to talk about all those books now, but I would like to try and read a lot of these books in 2024. Like I said, these are 35 Victorian books I want to read over the course of 2024 and 2025, but I would really like to read 20 of them in 2024 so that I'm more than halfway through at the end of 2024, especially because I feel like the further I get from having made that video, the more I will have discovered lots of new Victorian books that I want to read, and maybe the books that I talked about in that video won't be as much of a priority, so I feel like I should read as many as possible this year while they're all still a priority, if that makes sense. So hopefully I'll read lots of books from my long-term Victorian literature TBR this year. I will say that it is a goal that is kind of like in conflict with my goal to get my physical TBR down, because I think only 3 of the books on my physical TBR are Victorian. A lot of the Victorian books that I want to read are, you know, out of print, relatively obscure books that I'll be reading on ebook. But I also want to prioritise Victorian literature because I love Victorian literature, so hopefully I can find a good balance between classics and my physical TBR, and you know, we'll see how it goes. My 4th goal for 2024, which is a continuing goal from the previous year, is to continue to push myself to read more diversity, broadly kind of in 3 categories, I suppose, in terms of reading more by authors of colour, in terms of reading more by authors from a wider variety of countries, and also in terms of reading more in translation. Obviously that kind of ties into reading more from a variety of countries. Specifically, I would quite like to beat my 2023 goals that I got close to but didn't quite surpass, and have more than 15% of my reading be in translation, and read books from more than 25 different countries. So hopefully I'll manage that this year, but we will see how I go. But then finally, my main reading goal thing of 2024 is my crazy specific goals spreadsheet, which I really, really love. And I want to hold up here, but I'll probably also put it on the screen because it's obviously harder to see when I'm just holding it. And you can see it in all its beautiful spreadsheet glory. So this is something I've been doing for the last few years, where I make myself a goals spreadsheet with boxes to tick off in a lot of different categories. And basically this is a way of having a lot of specific smaller goals, and also of kind of making sure my reading is varied across a lot of different things that I like to read, I suppose. So my spreadsheet for 2024 looks in some ways similar to my spreadsheet for 2023. Some aims are the same, some have been reduced or expanded, just depending on what I feel like focusing on this year, or kind of reflecting the realities of my reading in 2023, I suppose. And yes, my reading goal spreadsheet is even more ambitious than last year, even though I didn't manage to tick off everything in 2023, but that is the joy of having a reading goals spreadsheet and ticking things off. I just really, really enjoy this way of doing reading goals. It's definitely made a big difference for me. So let's go through category by category and we'll have a look at all the different boxes for me to tick off in 2024. So first off, I have a few rows of classics, and we start off with Victorian classics. So I have 6 boxes here for Dickens rereads, because I am carrying on with the Mega Dickens read along in 2024, and there are 6 more Dickens novels for us to read before the read along ends. And then I've also got 5 boxes for other Victorian rereads, because I will probably reread some other Victorian classics at some point in the year, especially in Victober. And then I have 6 boxes for Anthony Trollope books. In 2023, I had 5 boxes and read 3, so maybe if I have 6 boxes, it will encourage me to read more. Also, I would really like to try and read a lot of Anthony Trollope this year, because he's one of my absolute favourite authors, and I am relatively close in the grand scheme of things to reading all his novels. He wrote 47 and I have read 34. So if I read 6 books by him in 2024 and 7 books by him in 2025, then I would have read all of his novels by the end of 2025, and that would be really, really satisfying. So I would kind of like to do that, but you know, we'll see how we go. And then I have 19 other boxes for Victorian books which don't fit into any of the other categories, meaning in total I would like to try and read 36 Victorian books in 2024. I love Victorian literature a lot and I want to continue to read lots of it in 2024. Next Next on my goals spreadsheet, I have boxes for British classics that aren't from the Victorian period, and I have 10 spaces for books from 1900 to 1950. I always enjoyed books from the early 20th century. I also have 8 boxes for British literature from before the Victorian period and 5 boxes for British literature from kind of between 1950 and 1990, which I generally usually use as the kind of like cut-off point for classics. A bit arbitrary, but there we go. I feel like this section of my goals spreadsheet has pretty much stayed the same from 2023, and that is absolutely fine by me. Then finally, in the classics section, I have boxes for international classics, classics that aren't from Britain, where I'm from. So every year I pick out 3 different countries that I want to read some classics from, and I aim to kind of read 4 classics from those countries. And so the 3 countries I picked this year for my international classics challenge are Canada, Nigeria, and the Philippines. I'm really excited to read some books from these countries. I think I have read a couple of Canadian classics before, including Anne of Green Gables, but not very many. I have read, I think, probably 1 Nigerian classic before, Things Fall Apart, which I studied at university, and I don't think I've read any classics from the Philippines, though I have read a couple of pieces of contemporary literature from the Philippines. So I'm really excited to read some classics from these countries. I've already started like compiling a bit of a list, but if anyone has any recommendations of classic literature from these countries, please do let me know. I'm also, as I said, trying to read more in translations, so it'd be great to have some recommendations for French Canadian classics as well as English language Canadian classics, and doing some research on classic literature from the Philippines. I think I'll probably end up reading some things that were written in English, some that are translated from Spanish, and some from Tagalog. So if anyone has any recommendations of classic literature from Canada, Nigeria, or the Philippines, please do leave them down below in the comments. That will be really, really helpful. I'm really looking forward to reading some books from these countries this year. And then I also have 14 spaces for classics from other places in the world. I think last year I specified a few other countries that I wanted to read a classic or 2 from, but this year I've just been a bit broader because I do want to push myself to read from a wider variety of countries, and to read classics especially from a wider variety of countries. So hopefully I'll just pick up like a range of international classics this year. That would be really nice. So again, if you have any other recommendations for international classics, and especially for classics in translation, then please do let me know down in the comments, and I will see what I get to this year. I am now looking over at my physical TBR, and I think I have 3 books that are international classics on my physical TBR, and that's all. So is this goal gonna slightly work against my physical TBR goal for this year? Maybe, but that's okay. We will find a way to have a balance. Next, moving on to my goals for modern books in 2024. First, I have my historical fiction section, which I have slightly changed from last year. So I have 25 boxes for general historical fiction, and then I have 5 boxes for historical crime or mystery books. I think I read 3 historical murder mysteries in 2023, all of which I really enjoyed, and it made me think that I should try and read some more. So I thought I would separate that out as a separate category in my reading goals for this year. And then I also thought that in general it would be a good idea to slightly expand my modern historical fiction goal for 2024, because I read well over what my goal had been in 2023, and I love historical fiction, and I also have a lot of it on my physical TBR, so I'm sure I will have no problem ticking off all of these boxes in 2024. I read a lot of historical fiction. I love it a lot. It is wonderful. Then next on my goals spreadsheet, I have other genres of modern fiction, so I would like to try and read 5 rom-coms this year, which feels very manageable for me. I would also like to try and read 3 sci-fi or fantasy books this year. I think last year I said I wanted to read 7, and I read like 1, so I put a smaller goal this year, but I would really like to tick off all of those slots because I really enjoy sci-fi and fantasy, and I don't read it as much as I would like to. Again, I have no sci-fi and fantasy on my physical TBR, but I do have 1 rom-com on my physical TBR. I then would also try and like to read at least 5 crime or murder mystery books this year. I think I have a couple of these on my physical TBR, and in general I always really enjoy crime thrillers and kind of cozy murder mysteries, especially when I read them. And then I've also got 5 boxes for other, which I guess would cover literary fiction, and if I read any YA/middle grade, which I'm not super likely to do. I think the only YA book I have on my shelves is a historical YA, so that will go into my historical fiction section anyway, and I don't tend to read a lot of literary fiction that is set in the present day. I think I have a couple on my TBR, but not very many. In general, it is for me all about the historical fiction and the classics. Then my next section on my goals spreadsheet is modern books that aren't from the UK. So I'd like to read at least 6 contemporary Japanese books this year. I really like Japanese fiction, and I always tend to read a few Japanese books each year. In fact, I've already read 1 Japanese book in 2024, and I've also put in 8 boxes for contemporary literature from the USA. As I think I've mentioned before on my goals spreadsheet, I tend to separate out the US in this challenge, not necessarily because I have a specific goal of reading a certain amount of books from the US, but because I feel like the country I am most likely to read books from after the UK is the US. So I want to like count them separately so that my international reading isn't like entirely taken up by books from the US. And then I also have 15 other boxes for other international literature from other countries in the world. And I would really like to tick off these boxes with books from as many different countries as possible. We'll see how that goes. As I've already said, my physical TBR is also going to be a priority for this year. And I expect my physical TBR is pretty heavily made up of British literature, but I would really like to read more books from different places around the world in 2024, so we will see how I go. Then my next reading goal for 2024 is to read 15 2024/2025 new releases. The reason why I have said 2025 new releases as well as 2024 new releases is because on my reading goals spreadsheet for 2023, I had a section for 2023 new releases, and then towards the end of 2023, I read quite a lot of proof copies of books coming out in 2024, and it felt a bit silly that I couldn't use them to tick off that goal because the idea is to read very new releases. So if I end up reading some proof copies of books coming out in 2025 in November 2024, I feel like I should be able to tick off this goal with them. I have slightly reduced this goal from last year. I think I said I wanted to read 20 new releases in 2023, and I have brought that goal down in 2024 because, you know, like I said, I'm trying to focus on my physical TBR, but I do still want to read new releases because I love reading new releases, and I'm always excited to see what books come out. And like I said, I do sometimes get sent books for review, so I'm imagining that half of these slots-ish will probably end up being taken up by review copies, and then the other half, I will probably end up buying things in bookshops at some point in the year, but I will try and be a bit more restrained in terms of what new releases I'm buying. I would like to read new releases this year, but I would also really like to get down my physical TBR. Then moving down to my last 2 general goals. The first one is books that aren't novels. And as you can see, there are a lot of boxes on this goal, and I have really expanded this goal from last year to represent what I'm actually reading. I read in 2023 a lot more plays, short story collections and poetry than I ever had before, and I really enjoyed it, and I want to continue reading lots of plays, lots of poetry, and lots of short stories. And I'm also in a book club where every month we read 1 play, 1 short story and 1 poetry collection, and assuming we keep going in 2024, I will therefore read presumably 12 plays, short stories and poetry collections just for the book club. So I decided to give myself 14 boxes for plays, for short stories or short story collections and for poetry, and also 8 boxes at the end for non-fiction. It's kind of tricky to set a goal for me for non-fiction because I do read quite a lot of non-fiction for historical research for writing, where I don't always read a book all the way through, so I wouldn't necessarily like tick it off on a reading prompt. So I guess the 8 books on my non-fiction goal would be for like non-fiction that I'm reading cover to cover all the way through, rather than other bits and pieces of non-fiction that I'm reading for research. Regardless, as you can see, I want to read 50 things that aren't novels in 2024, and I think considering the amount of plays, short story collections and poetry I have been reading for the last few years, this should be pretty doable and will be really fun. And obviously plays, poetry collections and short story collections do tend to often be a bit shorter than other things, so I think this this massive section of my goals does make things a little bit more manageable, hopefully, in 2024. And then finally, I have here my TBR jar pick section, and I have added a lot more boxes on to this than last year because, as I said, I really do want to get down my physical TBR in 2024, and I feel like if I have a lot of boxes to tick off, 40 boxes to tick off, then one, if I ticked off all 40 of those boxes, my TBR would be at a good size, and also my TBR jar would be not empty, but, you know, would have 7 books left in, and also 40 boxes is a lot to tick off, so if I haven't ticked off very many a few months into the year, I will feel hopefully the pressure from that, and it will help me read books on my physical TBR, because there are so many books on my physical TBR that I am really excited for that I'm just not reading because there are too many other books, or I'm buying new books, or I feel a pressure to read a review copy or whatever. I just feel like I need to refocus on my physical TBR and read some of the books that I've had on my shelves for ages that I'm really excited about. So hopefully this final goal will help push me towards that. So in total, over the course of my crazy goal spreadsheet, I have 267 boxes to tick off. Usually, as I said, I tend to read, I don't know, 150 books or so a year, but obviously a lot of books will count for multiple things. Everything that I tick off on my TBR jar prompt will probably count for another category. Everything that ticks off a 2024 new releases box will probably tick off something else. And also a lot of boxes are taken up by poetry, short stories / short story collections and plays, which do tend to be quite a lot shorter than novels. So I feel like I can probably tick off a lot of these boxes in 2024, but you know, we'll see how I go. As always, this is a fun gamification of my reading rather than like boxes I feel I must tick off. I don't really feel that great a pressure to tick off things on this spreadsheet, although I do feel a great deal of pressure right now to get down my physical TBR. Sometimes I do feel like it was a foolish idea to make my TBR shelf the bookshelf that is attached to my desk, so that as a freelancer who works from home, I spend all day sat next to my physical TBR with my physical TBR there in front of me. Is that a bit unwise? Maybe, but oh well. It is also nice to look at the books. Anyway, I feel like this has been a very rambly video, but hopefully you have got a sense of my goals for 2024. I'm excited for another year of many books, I hope, and lots of good reading, hopefully. And that's all for now. Do let me know down in the comments what are your reading goals for 2024. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll be back very soon with another bookish video.